On the night of my 62nd birthday, surrounded by the family I had built over a lifetime, my daughter raised her glass and said, "My father is the most important person in my life." I nearly broke down in tears. 2 weeks later, after the biggest land deal of my career finally closed, I realized that party was never about celebrating me. Every smile, every toast, every warm embrace, it was the opening move of a plan 2 years in the making. Welcome back to Dad Family Revenge. Before we continue, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment and tell me what's the weather like, where you are right now. Your presence here truly matters. Just a quick note, some details have been adjusted for storytelling. The heart of the story, the message is what I hope stays with you. My name is Stanley Foster, and on my 62nd birthday, I stood in my backyard believing my daughter had finally forgiven me for outliving her mother. But the man standing behind her was already calculating how to steal everything I'd spent 35 years building. The string lights cast warm pools across the Newport Beach estate lawn that late August evening in 2023. 20 relatives mingled under the oak trees, their laughter mixing with the salt breeze from the ocean 3 blocks away. My cousin Helen Garrett had brought her famous lemon cake, the one with the crystallized sugar crust that crackled when you bit into it, and she kept refilling everyone's glasses with sweet tea from a sweating pitcher. Uncle Vernon Dunn, Ida's brother, sat in a folding chair near the back fence nursing a beer and watching everything with those sad, knowing eyes he'd had since the funeral 3 years ago. I should have been happy. The house was full of family. The business I'd built from nothing had just closed a $50 million land sale. My granddaughter Rue Quinn, all of 8 years old, with a pink shirt and her ponytail bouncing, ran through the crowd playing tag with her second cousins. But all I could think about was the empty chair beside me, the one where Ida should have been sitting, squeezing my hand and whispering that I'd invited too many people again. My daughter, Ilaria Foster Quinn, stood near the patio in a green dress that caught the light. She was 35 now, with Ida's cheekbones and my stubborn jaw. She'd been distant since her mother died, polite but careful, like I was made of glass she didn't want to shatter. Her husband, Nash Quinn, 38, stood a few steps behind her, in clothes that cost more than most people's rent. He had the kind of teeth you only get from expensive orthodontia, and the kind of tan you only maintain with deliberate effort. I'd never warmed to Nash, though I couldn't say exactly why. He'd married my daughter 6 years ago and given me Rue, and that should have been enough. "Dad," Ilaria said, raising her glass. The conversations around us quieted. "I just want to say in front of everyone here that you are the strongest man I've ever known." The relatives murmured approval. Someone said something about family being everything. Ilaria's eyes were glistening. "Dad is my entire world," she continued, her voice catching. "Without him, I am nothing." The applause was warm and genuine. Helen dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Even Vernon nodded slowly from his chair, lifting his beer in a silent toast. For 3 years, I had waited to hear those words. For 3 years, I had carried the weight of Ida's absence alone, wondering if Ilaria blamed me somehow for not saving her mother from the heart attack that took her in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. And now, standing in the golden light of my 62nd birthday, with my daughter's voice breaking with emotion, I felt something crack open in my chest, something that had been locked tight since the day we buried my wife. "Thank you, sweetheart," I managed to say. My own voice wasn't entirely steady. Why do we ignore the warnings staring us straight in the face? Because as Ilaria finished speaking, and the relatives started clapping again, my eyes found Nash standing directly behind her. He wasn't looking at his wife. He wasn't smiling at the tender moment or wiping away a tear. He was staring straight at me with eyes that were utterly, completely cold. Not angry, not sad, not warm, just calculating, like a man examining a problem he intended to solve. I looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Told myself I was imagining things. Nash had always been reserved, analytical. He worked in finance, something with hedge funds that I'd never fully understood. Of course he had a serious face. Of course he wasn't crying at a family birthday party. But I glanced back a moment later, and he was still watching me. The expression hadn't changed. There was no warmth behind those eyes. No affection for his father-in-law on his birthday. Just cold assessment. "Grandpa." Rue appeared at my elbow, breathless and flushed from running. "Can I have another slice of cake?" I forced myself to smile down at her, to ruffle her hair the way she liked. "Of course, sweetheart. Anything you want." She beamed and darted toward the dessert table where Helen was cutting generous slices for the children. When I looked back toward Ilaria, Nash had moved. He was now standing with a group of my former business partners near the grill, laughing at something someone had said. His smile was perfect. Warm, genuine looking. Like the cold stare had never happened. "Stanley," one of the relatives said, clapping me on the shoulder. $50 million. You must be so proud of everything you've built." "Earned every penny," someone else agreed. 35 years of smart decisions. I nodded and smiled and accepted the congratulations. The party flowed around me, cake and laughter and the clink of glasses. Rue ran past again, shrieking with delight as her cousins chased her. Helen's lemon cake was as perfect as always, the sweetness coating my tongue. The ocean breeze carried the scent of jasmine from Ida's garden, the one I still couldn't bring myself to let die. But I kept glancing back at Nash. He never looked at me again that night. He smiled and chatted and played the perfect son-in-law, charming and attentive. When he picked up Rue and spun her around, she squealed with joy, and he laughed like he meant it. I should have trusted my instincts that night. As the guests started leaving, and the string lights glowed softer in the darkness, I stood by the back door, watching Nash help Ilaria gather Rue's scattered toys from the lawn. He moved with casual efficiency, like a man completing a simple task. When he straightened up and caught me watching, he smiled and waved. But I would remember that earlier look for the rest of my life. Not because it was terrifying, it wasn't, but because it was entirely devoid of human emotion. Like a man staring at a financial statement, calculating which numbers to eliminate. 2 weeks later, everything would change when the money finally cleared. 2 weeks after that birthday party, I sat in an 18th floor glass conference room overlooking the Newport Beach harbor, signing the final paperwork of my 35-year career, and I had no idea I was also signing away my freedom. The room smelled like expensive leather and fresh coffee. Attorney Marcus Whitaker, mid-50s, with silver hair that probably cost $200 to cut, slid the last document across the mahogany table toward me. His partner attorney, Leah Ramsey, verified each signature with the kind of precision that made her worth every cent of her hourly rate. "Wire confirmed, Mr. Foster," Marcus said, tapping his laptop screen. $50 million less our fees and transfer costs. Congratulations. The money had come from a Dutch development conglomerate that wanted my coastal land parcel for a mixed-use project they'd been planning since 2018. I'd bought the property cheap in the 90s, when nobody wanted industrial waterfront, held it for 30 years, and sold it the month before regional zoning changes made it worth 10 times what I'd paid. "Your independent appraisals were brilliant," Leah added, closing her folder with a satisfied snap. 3 separate valuations from 3 separate firms. This transaction is completely bulletproof under California law. I should have felt triumphant. 35 years of laying brick and reading zoning maps and taking calculated risks had just deposited more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. But all I could think was that Ida should have been sitting in the empty chair beside me, squeezing my hand under the table and trying not to cry with pride. "Thank you both," I said, shaking their hands, "for everything." Marcus walked me to the elevator. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the harbor glittering in the late August sunlight. sailboats cutting white lines across the blue water. It was the kind of view successful men are supposed to enjoy. I drove home alone. That evening, my phone rang just as I was microwaving leftovers in the kitchen, where Ida used to make Sunday dinners for 20 people without breaking a sweat. Ilaria's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "Dad." Her voice had that trembling quality it had carried at my birthday party. "I've been thinking about you all day. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Just closed the sale this morning." "I know. That's what I'm worried about." She paused, and I could hear her breathing unsteady and careful. "Dad, I'm so worried about you. It must be so lonely living in that big house by yourself, isn't it?" My throat tightened. For 3 years, nobody had asked me that question. Not directly, not with genuine concern in their voice. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Why don't you come stay with us for a while?" Ilaria said quickly, like she'd been rehearsing. "Just until you feel stronger. We have plenty of room, and Rue would love having her grandpa around. I hate thinking of you alone in that house with all those memories." I didn't even let her finish. "I'd love that, sweetheart," I said. "When should I come?" "This weekend. Nash can help you pack whatever you need." After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen holding the phone and feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 years, hope. My daughter wanted me close. She was worried about me. She cared. 3 months slipped through my fingers like water, and I failed to notice that with each passing day, the walls were closing in tighter around me. By Thanksgiving, I'd been living in the mansion, my mansion technically, though it hadn't felt like mine in weeks, for nearly 90 days. 18 relatives gathered around the formal dining table that Thursday evening in November, candles flickering between platters of roasted turkey and sweet potato casserole and Helen's green bean almondine. The smell of sage and butter filled the air. Rue sat beside me in a velvet dress, carefully arranging her napkin in her lap, the way her mother had taught her. "Stanley, this turkey is just beautiful," Helen said, accepting the platter Nash passed her. Nash smiled that perfect smile. "We're so grateful to have Dad living with us now. It's been wonderful having him here." The lie was so smooth I almost believed it myself. Nobody mentioned that I'd stopped receiving mail. Nobody asked why my truck had vanished from the driveway 3 weeks ago, Nash explained casually, because I wasn't safe driving anymore. Nobody seemed to notice that I no longer had my own phone. I wanted to tell them, wanted to say something. But Ilaria kept catching my eye from across the table and smiling, and I told myself I was imagining problems that didn't exist. "You know," I said, setting down my fork, "this reminds me of Thanksgiving 1987. That was the year I finished my first commercial building in Garden Grove." "Dad?" Ilaria's voice cut across the table like a knife through warm butter. Casual, almost bored. "That story is from when Lincoln was a boy. Please stop bringing out those obsolete bricklayer lectures. Nobody wants to hear about hand-mixing mortar for the 1,000th time." The entire table went silent. I felt heat crawl up my neck. 18 faces stared at plates or wine glasses or the centerpiece anywhere but at me. I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. "You're right," I said quietly. "I'm sorry." "It's fine," Ilaria said, already turning to ask Rue about school. "Just try to stay in this century, okay?" Nash refilled wine glasses. Someone asked about dessert. Helen laughed too loud at something Vernon said. The conversation moved on like I'd never spoken at all, like the humiliation hanging in the air was just another piece of holiday decoration nobody wanted to acknowledge. Not one person defended me. Not Helen, who'd known me since she was 6 years old. Not Vernon, Ida's own brother, who'd sat in our living room 1,000 times listening to me tell those same stories while Ida smiled and refilled his coffee. Not a single relative at that table met my eyes or told Ilaria she was being cruel. I looked around at those familiar faces and saw them all suddenly finding somewhere else to direct their attention. At the time, I thought they were embarrassed for me pitying the old man who talked too much about the past. I thought maybe Ilaria was right, that I was boring them with outdated stories they'd heard before. Now I know I was completely wrong. They weren't embarrassed. They were afraid. Or worse, they believed her. After Thanksgiving, the casual cruelties didn't stop. They became the background noise I heard every single day. After Thanksgiving, the casual cruelties didn't stop. They became a sort of background noise I heard every single day until I actually began to question whether my mind was truly slipping away the way they claimed it was. The first week of December, Nash told a couple who'd stopped by for drinks that I'd tried to wire thousands of dollars to a phone scammer. I was sitting right there on the couch when he said it. "That's not true," I said. "I never." "Dad, please." Ilaria pressed a hand to her eyes like she was fighting tears. "See what we deal with. He gets aggressive when we try to help. It's breaking my heart." The couple exchanged that uncomfortable look and left quickly. I'd never tried to wire money to anyone, but Nash said it so smoothly that I found myself wondering if maybe I had forgotten. My phone disappeared that same week. "What phone, Dad?" Ilaria said, looking genuinely confused. "You haven't had a phone in months. You kept calling people at 3 in the morning. I had never called anyone at 3 in the morning. But she said it with such certainty that I started doubting my own memory. 2 weeks later, my Ford F-150 vanished from the garage. I'd driven that truck for 12 years. "We sold it last month," Ilaria explained with a patient sigh. "You don't need to drive anymore. It's safer this way." I didn't remember agreeing to sell my truck, but the garage was empty, and when I searched my memory for the moment they'd taken my keys, I came up blank. Had there been a conversation I'd forgotten? By mid-December, I no longer held a single key. Not to the house, not to a car, not to anything. I sat in the guest room with no phone, no vehicle, no way to reach anyone outside these walls without asking permission. Am I actually losing my mind? Or am I slowly being convinced that I am? I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Nash and Ilaria laughing downstairs. The question circled my brain like a vulture. If I was being manipulated, wouldn't I know it? But if I was genuinely losing my memory, wouldn't that explain the confusion, the gaps, the constant feeling that reality had shifted? That question would haunt me for 3 more weeks. The following Sunday, Ilaria drove me to my cousin's house for a family gathering. "Dad needs to catch up with everyone," she said. "It's good for him to socialize." 12 relatives scattered across the living room when we arrived. Sports played on the television. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen where Helen was arranging cookies. Uncle Vernon sat in his usual spot nursing his second beer, and sitting by the window in a worn leather chair was Alvin Holmes. Alvin was 62, same as me. We'd built construction projects together for 30 years, framed houses in August heat, poured foundations in January rain, argued over blueprints, and laughed over beer when the work was done. He'd been my best man when I married Ida. He was the man I trusted more than anyone still living. I hadn't seen him since my birthday party in August. "Stanley," Helen said, handing me coffee. "So good to see you." "I'm fine," I said, though the words felt automatic. I made my way toward Alvin, relief flooding through me. Here was someone who knew me, who'd worked beside me for 3 decades, who would see through whatever was happening. Alvin looked up as I approached. Our eyes met for just a second, and then he looked away, his jaw tight. "Alvin," I started, but before I could say anything else, he spoke. His voice carried across the room loud enough that every conversation stopped. "I have to be honest," Alvin said, addressing the gathered family instead of me. "Stanley's memory has been shot lately. Last week I called him about the Riverside project we managed together for 15 years, and he couldn't even remember what I was talking about." The room went silent except for the television's murmur. "Ilaria is doing the right thing by stepping in," Alvin continued. He still wasn't looking at me. "Someone needs to protect him from himself." My heart didn't stop because of the words. It stopped because for a fraction of a second, before he spoke, Alvin had held my gaze dead on. And there was something in that look I couldn't decipher, something that didn't match the words coming out of his mouth. Ilaria touched my arm gently. "Let's get you home, Dad. You look tired." I didn't argue. Even Alvin, my friend, my partner, the man who'd stood beside me through 30 years, had just told everyone that my mind was gone. Alvin drove me home. Ilaria had asked him to saying she needed to stay and help clean up. Neither of us uttered a syllable the entire ride. The silence pressed against my ears like deep water. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of Newport Beach, blurring past, trying to understand what had just happened. When we pulled up to the estate, I reached for the door handle. Alvin's hand shot out and gripped my arm fast, hard, unyielding, not gentle, not comforting, just pressure, deliberate and intense, like he was communicating something he couldn't say out loud. Then he let go and drove off before I could even react. I stood on the pavement watching his taillights fade into the December darkness, and I wondered, was that squeeze a goodbye or a lifeline? I couldn't sleep that night, not because of Alvin's words, but because of something I was about to find in Ida's keepsake box. I couldn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but because I was doing the only thing that brings me comfort when loneliness gets too heavy. I pulled down Ida's old keepsake box from the closet shelf, and my fingers brushed against something I'd never seen before. Cold rain tapped against the bedroom window. The box sat on my lap, familiar and worn, filled with the small treasures Ida had collected over 40 years of marriage theater tickets, from our anniversary trips, pressed flowers from Rue's christening, a silver charm bracelet I'd given her for her 50th birthday. Behind our wedding photograph, tucked into the velvet lining, was a cream-colored envelope I'd somehow missed in the 3 years since her death. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Ida's, but shaky, written when her fingers were failing her, maybe days before the heart attack that took her. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Stanley, my love," the letter began. "If the day ever comes that Ilaria does something that makes you doubt everything you thought you knew about our daughter, I need you to trust your instincts. You are never wrong about people. You are only wrong when you choose to stay silent out of love. Don't be silent this time. Fight back. I will be watching over you, I read it 3 times, then 4. The rain kept falling against the glass, and somewhere downstairs, Nash laughed at something on television, and I sat in the dark holding proof that Ida had known. She had known something was wrong with our daughter before she drew her last breath. She had tried to warn me from beyond the grave. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my wallet, the only possession they hadn't taken from me yet. 3 days later, the front doorbell rang at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. I heard Ilaria's footsteps in the hallway, the click of the lock, and then a familiar voice that made my chest tighten. "Hey there, sweetheart," the voice said, sharp with a Texas drawl I hadn't heard in 3 years. "I'm just in town to see how Stanley is holding up." "Aunt Sylvia," Ilaria's voice went tight as a drawn bowstring. "This is unexpected." Sylvia Hayes was 60, my late wife's sharp-tongued younger sister from Houston. She had Ida's dark eyes and iron spine, but where Ida had been gentle, Sylvia was a blade wrapped in honey-sweet Southern manners. I hadn't seen her since we buried Ida. "Where is he?" Sylvia asked, and I heard her boots clicking across the hardwood toward my room before Ilaria could answer. When she appeared in my doorway, she looked me up and down with the kind of assessing gaze a general gives wounded soldiers. Then she smiled all teeth. "Stanley Foster," she said. "You look like hammered hell. Let's go sit in the garden." We sat beneath the orange tree in the backyard, 2 wooden chairs in the shade. The December air was cool and smelled faintly of jasmine from the hedge. Through the kitchen window, I could see Ilaria's silhouette shifting behind the sheer curtains, watching us. Sylvia didn't bother with polite conversation. She studied the way I sat, the way I spoke, the defensive glances I kept throwing toward that kitchen window. Then she leaned close and whispered, Stanley, snap out of it. Your family hasn't abandoned you. They've abandoned the crumbling old man your daughter has been systematically painting you as for over a year. The words hit me like cold water. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying Ilaria has been telling everyone you're losing your mind, that you can't remember basic facts, that you're paranoid and aggressive. And they believed her because why would a daughter lie about her own father? Sylvia's voice stayed low-controlled. But I didn't believe her, because my sister warned me 3 years ago that something was wrong with that girl. For the first time in months, someone had called what was happening to me by its real name. I need you to trust me completely, Sylvia continued. And I need you to understand I didn't come back to California just to visit. I came to help you fight back. That night, I only learned what happened weeks later when Sylvia told me the whole story. At 11 o'clock, she stood in the pitch-black second-floor hallway, pressed against the wall in the shadows below the master bedroom balcony. Ilaria and Nash had stepped outside onto the balcony for what they thought was a private conversation. Their voices carried through the night air sharp and clear. "The old man has nothing left but us," Nash said, and Sylvia could hear the satisfaction in his tone. "He's completely cut off. No phone, no car, no contact with anyone who matters. Push him a few more weeks and we'll have his signature on every single transfer document." "What about Aunt Sylvia?" Ilaria asked. "That old Texas bat doesn't know a damn thing," Nash replied. "Let her fly home thinking she did her good deed. Then we execute." Sylvia pulled out her phone in the darkness, her hands steady despite the fury coursing through her veins. She opened an app that synced with the old iPad she'd secretly slipped under my pillow that afternoon when Ilaria wasn't looking. Her fingers moved across the screen, typing 2 words. I saw the notification flash across the iPad screen at 11:17 p.m. 2 words glowing in the darkness. I lay perfectly still in bed, listening to the absolute quiet of the house, feeling something inside my chest harden into steel. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had proof. I had an ally. And I had my dead wife's blessing to fight back. That night, for the first time in months, I slept like a baby. A week after Sylvia's text, I walked into what everyone believed was a routine checkup, but was actually the first meeting of the secret family council. A week after Sylvia's text, Ilaria let me leave the house for a routine senior wellness checkup on a Saturday morning. The car stopped in front of the clinic. I walked inside through the glass doors and immediately walked straight out the back door, where Alvin was waiting with his engine running. I climbed into the passenger seat, and for the first time in months, I was breathing outside air without a handler watching every move. "Buckle up," Alvin said, pulling into traffic before I'd even closed the door. "We've got 20 people waiting. 20. 10 family members. Plus Sylvia, plus me, plus you." He glanced at me and his mouth was set in a hard line. Plus 8 months of rage. We drove in silence through Newport Beach, past the harbor, where sailboats bobbed in the January sunshine, past the streets I'd driven for 40 years. Everything looked the same and completely different, like I was seeing my own life from the outside for the first time. Alvin's house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall hedges that blocked the neighbor's view. We pulled into the garage, and he closed the door behind us before either of us got out of the car. Even now, we were being careful. Inside the living room, curtains were drawn tight against the world. 10 people sat around a round table that normally held 4 aunts, uncles, cousins I'd known my entire life. Black coffee steamed in mismatched mugs. Someone had brought donuts in a pink bakery box, but nobody was eating. Every face turned toward me as I walked in, grave and expectant. Sylvia stood by the window, arms crossed, watching me with those dark eyes that were so much like Ida's. It made my chest ache. "Sit down, Stanley," she said quietly. I sat. The chair felt solid beneath me, real in a way nothing had felt solid in months. I looked around at these familiar faces, Helen with her tissue already pressed to her eyes, Vernon nursing coffee instead of beer. For once, cousins and relatives who'd watched me grow my business from nothing. I need to tell you what's really happening, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. And I need to know, am I losing my mind or am I being destroyed? Helen started crying before I finished the sentence. Stanley, she said, we know. We've known for months. The words didn't make sense at first. I stared at her, then at Vernon, then at the others. Every time we tried to reach you, Vernon said, setting down his coffee with deliberate care. Ilaria intercepted us. Phone calls, visits, everything. She'd pull us aside and explain your condition. Tell us you were having a hard day, that you got confused easily, that we needed to be patient with you. Aunt Joyce Sutton, Ida's cousin, sat across from me with red eyes. We saw what she was doing at Thanksgiving. The way she humiliated you in front of everyone. Stanley, I'm so sorry I didn't say anything. I just didn't know how to reach you. Cousin Daniel Fletcher, mid-40s and built like a linebacker, leaned forward. I tried to call you 3 times in November. Ilaria answered every time, said you were resting, said you'd call me back. You never did. Because you never got the messages, did you? I shook my head, unable to speak. We didn't believe her, Helen said firmly. Not really. Not the woman who'd built houses with her bare hands and read zoning law like poetry. But we didn't know what to do. We were afraid that if we pushed too hard, she'd cut us off from you completely. For the first time in months, I didn't feel isolated. I felt dangerous. Several of us suspected fraud, Alvin said from his position by the door. But we needed confirmation from you. That arm squeeze in December, that was me telling you to hold on. That we knew something was wrong. I remembered that squeeze. The pressure of his hand, fast and hard and unyielding. The lifeline I'd been too broken to fully understand. I need only one thing from my bloodline, I said, and my voice came out cold and clear. Keep pretending to believe Ilaria. Keep acting like you think I'm losing my mind. I need them completely complacent. I need them arrogant. Alvin was the first to nod. Then Vernon. Then Helen, wiping her eyes. Then every single person at that table. Done, Alvin said. Sylvia stepped forward from the window. I've been working on this since I got Ida's letter 3 years ago. Your wife knew something was wrong with your daughter long before she died. She asked me to watch over you, to wait for the right moment. She pulled out a thick folder from her bag. We have legal counsel standing by, we have documentation, and as of next week, we'll have more. The following Tuesday morning, I was walking down the second-floor hallway of the estate when Sylvia passed me going the opposite direction. She slipped something into my hand, an old iPad and a tightly folded piece of paper. We walked in opposite directions without speaking, the entire exchange lasting less than 15 seconds. In my room, I unfolded the note. Don't ask questions, but as of today, the vitamin bottle on the kitchen counter has been replaced with an identical replica containing a court-authorized recording device. Act natural. Take them as you always do. Leave the rest to me. I read it twice, then tore it into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. Surrendering absolute control was the hardest discipline I'd ever forced myself to maintain. But I'd spent 40 years building a business on the principle that you hire good people and then you trust them to do their jobs. Sylvia was good people. The best. That morning I went downstairs for coffee. Ilaria was already in the kitchen pouring orange juice for Rue's breakfast. The vitamin bottle sat on the counter where it always did, innocent and ordinary. "Morning, Dad," Ilaria said with that sweet smile she'd perfected. "Don't forget your vitamins." She shook out 2 pills into my palm from the bottle she thought belonged to her game, the bottle that was now recording every word we spoke. I smiled at Ilaria and said, "Thanks, sweetheart, Dad appreciates it." Ilaria smiled right back, warm and loving and perfect. And neither person in that kitchen had any idea they were performing for the other. February came, and for the first time in months, I was entirely alone in the house, standing in front of a door I'd been watching since last month. February came, and on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, Ilaria took Rue to school, and Nash left to meet a client. For the first time in weeks, I was entirely alone in the house, standing in front of the heavily locked white door I'd been watching since last month. The doorbell rang at exactly 10:15. The plumber, Ed Mercer, arrived with professional lockpick tools tucked discreetly into his toolbox, dispatched by Sylvia under the pretext of an emergency pipe inspection. He was mid-50s with calloused hands and the kind of face that had seen everything twice. "Emergency pipe inspection," he said when I opened the door. "Ma'am said there's a leak behind this wall upstairs." "Yes, thank you for coming so quickly," I said, keeping my voice steady. I led him to the second-floor hallway, to the white door with 3 separate locks that Nash had installed in November. Ed studied them for maybe 10 seconds, then pulled out his tools. 30 seconds later, all 3 locks clicked open in sequence. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything, sir," he said quietly, then disappeared down the stairs. I stood in the hallway, listening to my own heartbeat for a full minute before I turned the handle. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, and it smelled like stale air and chemical printer ink. No windows, no construction blueprints or spare household items stored away for later. Just this. 2 laptop monitors glowed on a desk pushed against the far wall. Industrial printers sat stacked on metal shelving. And spread across the main desk were stacks of pre-printed legal documents, meticulously organized in labeled folders. I picked up the first folder. Petition for conservatorship of person and estate, California Probate Code, Section 1801. My name filled every line. Petitioner Ilaria Foster Quinn. Proposed conservatee Stanley Robert Foster. Grounds: severe cognitive decline. Inability to manage financial affairs, danger to self. There were 18 separate documents, each one more detailed than the last. Medical evaluations from doctors I'd never met. Psychiatric assessments detailing symptoms I'd never exhibited. Witness statements from people describing incidents that had never happened. On the wall, a printed timeline stretched across a corkboard. 18 months mapped out in careful detail. August 2023, land sale closes. Established dependency. November 2023, public humiliation phase. Isolate from family. December 2023 to February 2024. Document cognitive decline. Secure medical opinions. March 2024, file emergency conservatorship petition. April 2024, signature day. This wasn't an impulsive money grab. This was a cold-blooded multi-year execution strategy. I found a manila folder labeled Stage 4 Signature Day in thick black marker. Inside were transfer documents for every asset I owned: the business, the properties, investment accounts, everything. All pre-filled with signature lines highlighted in yellow. All dated for April. A separate folder contained a curated roster of psychiatrists with handwritten notes in the margins. Will testify for standard fee. Requires advance payment. Good for emergency holds. They had been planning this since before the sale even closed. Maybe longer. Maybe years. I pulled out the hidden iPad Sylvia had given me and started photographing. Every page. Every timeline notation. Every fake medical evaluation. The camera shutter clicked softly in the quiet room, and my hands stayed perfectly steady, even though my pulse was hammering in my ears. The very last page in the Signature Day folder was a handwritten note on Nash's personal stationery. His handwriting neat and precise. If he refuses to sign, see Dr. Harmon, re-emergency psychiatric hold. 72 hours is enough. I photographed it. Read it again to make sure I understood exactly what it meant. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to have me forcibly committed to a psychiatric facility if I resisted. 72 hours. Long enough to break someone. Long enough to get a confused old man to sign anything just to make it stop. I took one more photograph, then carefully placed every single document back exactly where I'd found it. The folders went back in precise order. The pens lined up parallel to the desk edge. The timeline stayed pinned to the corkboard at exactly the same angle. Then I stepped out and clicked the door shut behind me softly without making a sound. Ed was waiting downstairs. He locked all 3 deadbolts in reverse order, tested each one to make sure they were secure, then packed his tools and left through the front door. I sat in my room for an hour afterwards, staring at the photographs on the iPad, feeling something cold and hard settle into my bones. That same evening, as Sylvia recounted to me weeks later, she sat in the small room she'd rented at a neighbor's house 3 doors down the street. Her laptop screen glowed under a single desk lamp, casting her face in blue light. She'd been tracing Ilaria's financial footprints through interconnected accounts for 2 weeks, following the money through shell corporations and false bottom ledgers, and tonight she found it. DV Wellness, LLC, registered in Nevada 17 months ago. A shell corporation with no physical address, no employees, no business activity, except receiving wire transfers from a single source, an account labeled Stanley Foster Medical Care Fund. $800,000 had been funneled through that corporation over 14 months. Not stolen outright, that would be too obvious. Just steady withdrawals marked as medical expenses, care coordination fees, therapeutic services. And the single beneficiary listed on the corporate registration was a 29-year-old male residing at a Las Vegas address. Sylvia saved the forensic trail to 3 separate encrypted drives. She documented every transaction, every transfer, every false invoice. But she chose not to tell me immediately. I needed perfect composure to keep playing my part. I needed to smile at Ilaria every morning and thank her for vitamins that were probably meant to make me sick. She wrote a note on a small piece of paper. When the time comes, you will need to know this. Then she slipped into the estate late that night, while everyone slept, and placed it inside Ida's keepsake box, where she knew I'd eventually find it. 3 days later, I found Sylvia's cryptic note. And 2 weeks after that, I would deliver a sample that would change everything, while Sylvia tracked the money. I did my part of the heavy lifting. Every morning, Ilaria handed me my daily vitamin. I took it, nodded my thanks, and the second her back was turned, I slipped the pill into my pocket. The deception required perfect discipline. Any slip, any cough, any hesitation, any moment where she glanced back too quickly would reveal everything. But I'd spent 40 years reading blueprints and managing construction sites where one miscalculation could kill someone. Precision wasn't new to me. For 14 days straight, the routine never varied. "Here's your vitamin, Dad," Ilaria would say each morning, shaking out a single white pill from the bottle on the kitchen counter. "Don't forget." "Thank you, sweetheart." I'd reply, accepting it with a grateful smile. She'd turn to pour Rue's orange juice or rinse a coffee cup, and in that 3-second window, my hand would move to my pocket. The pill would disappear. By the time she glanced back, I'd be sipping my coffee, looking tired and docile. After 2 weeks, I had enough. On a Monday morning in late February, I delivered a small plastic bag containing 14 pills to a private forensic laboratory in Irvine. The facility was unmarked, tucked between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation office in a strip mall where nobody would notice an old man walking through the door. Lab technician Karen Ballard met me in a sterile white room that smelled like disinfectant and rubber gloves. She was maybe 40 with pulled-back hair and the kind of methodical movements that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times. "We'll run a full chemical analysis," she said, sealing the bag and signing a chain of custody form. 10 to 14 business days for results. "That's fine," I said. "I can wait." Throughout the agonizing wait, I continued my performance. I feigned forgetfulness, losing my train of thought mid-sentence when Nash asked me questions. I acted exhausted by early afternoon, retiring to my room for naps I didn't need. And every single morning I pretended to take my medication while Ilaria watched with that sweet, concerned smile. Late one February evening, Rue slipped into my bedroom just as I was turning off the lamp. "Grandpa." Her voice was small in the darkness. "Why do you go to sleep so early now?" I pulled her up onto my lap, feeling her small weight settle against my chest. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the lavender soap Ilaria used for her bath. Her ponytail tickled my chin. "Grandpa is just getting old, Rue," I said, stroking her hair. "Old people need a lot of rest." She looked up at me with those innocent 8-year-old eyes that still believed the world was fundamentally good. "You don't look old to me, Grandpa." She drifted off to sleep in my arms a few minutes later, her breathing slow and steady. I sat frozen, terrified to stir, listening to the rhythm of her breath, and thinking only one thing: this child must never find out what is happening. She must never know what her mother tried to do. She must be protected from this ugliness no matter what it costs. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about tactics, evidence, or probate law. I just held my granddaughter and wished Ida were here to tell me how to keep this little girl's world from shattering. On the first Wednesday in March, a notification blinked on the hidden iPad at 9 o'clock at night. Sylvia's message, 3 words: "Lab results. Call ready." I opened the secure app she'd installed before slipping the iPad under my pillow. I was alone in my room, door closed, curtains drawn. "Lab results came back," she said without preamble. "Exactly what we thought. Are you ready for the next phase?" "When?" "Right now." I pulled out a piece of plain paper from my desk drawer and a ballpoint pen. Then I handwrote the most unhinged last will and testament I could imagine. I made the handwriting deliberately shaky with calculated misspellings and crossed-out words. I dated it with today's date, and I wrote in careful block letters: "I, Stanley Robert Foster, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments. All assets and the $50 million shall be transferred immediately to the Sacred Light Fellowship, a non-profit spiritual sanctuary in Sedona, Arizona, for the purpose of enlightenment and cosmic awakening. My daughter, Ilaria Foster Quinn, is to receive nothing, as she has failed to understand the divine vibrations." I signed it with a flourish. Dated it again at the bottom. Then I left the paper clearly visible in my slightly open desk drawer, the corner sticking out just enough to catch someone's eye if they walked past. I turned off the light, climbed into bed, and faked the deep, steady breathing of an old man in genuine sleep. 20 minutes later, I heard the faint scrape of the drawer sliding open in the darkness. The next morning at 6 o'clock, the hidden microphone inside the kitchen vitamin bottle captured everything. Ilaria's voice came through trembling and high-pitched. "Nash, look at the photo I just texted you. Look at it right now." A pause. Then Nash's voice, sharp and alert despite the early hour. "What the hell is this? The old man has completely lost his mind." Ilaria's words tumbled over each other. "He wrote a new will last night, leaving everything to some cult in Sedona, $50 million to a spiritual sanctuary. We have to get him to sign the conservatorship paperwork this week, or every single dime goes to these people." "Calm down," Nash said. "This actually works in our favor. It proves diminished capacity. I've already locked in Dr. Harmon for the psychiatric evaluation. Next Friday. We'll have the paperwork ready. The second the old man signs, it's over." "Next Friday," Ilaria repeated, and I could hear her breathing slow down. Okay. Next Friday." I listened to that recording 3 times, sitting alone in my room with the iPad on my lap. Then I shut it down, put it away in the drawer beneath my socks, and called Sylvia. "The fish bit the bait," I said when she answered. "Move us to the next step." While the bait will had Ilaria and Nash spinning in circles, Sylvia was fighting on a completely different front, a front I didn't even know existed. Monday morning. Sylvia drove me to an office park in Irvine I'd never visited before, and what I found inside changed my understanding of exactly how deep their deception went. The facility was tucked into an office park in Irvine, sterile and anonymous. Inside, massive monitors covered 3 walls, flashing data in patterns I couldn't decipher. The air conditioning hummed steadily, keeping the room cold enough to see my breath. It smelled like electronics and strong coffee. Digital forensic expert Bradley Townsend met us in the main analysis room. He was maybe 50, with the kind of precision in his movements that came from working with delicate equipment for decades. He gestured to a chair in front of the largest screen. "Mr. Foster," he said, typing commands that made windows cascade across the monitor. "We've recovered the complete call metadata from your device backup." I glanced at Sylvia. She nodded once. "Show him the 2 a.m. calls," she said. The calls Nash had been using as proof of my Alzheimer's. The emergency phone calls I'd supposedly made to Ilaria at 2 in the morning, panicked and confused, asking her where I was, or claiming someone had broken into the house. The calls relatives had heard about. The calls that proved my rapid cognitive decline. Townsend pulled up a data grid. "These calls," he said, highlighting a series of entries in red, "were generated by a number spoofing application. Not placed from your physical device, created digitally to appear as if they came from your phone number." He clicked to another screen. "Originating IP address your home router. Installation date exactly 3 weeks after you moved into the residence." I stared at the screen. Every single emergency call. Every piece of evidence Nash had paraded in front of my relatives. Every proof of my supposed dementia. All of it manufactured from inside the house I was living in. "Everything?" I asked quietly. "Every call logged as originating from your number between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m., Townsend confirmed. "All digitally fabricated. None of them were real." I looked at the data grid and felt a bizarre sensation, not anger, just cold, absolute freezing cold. "Whoever built this framework," Townsend continued, "knew exactly what they were doing. This is a long-term calculated operation, not an impulse." I remembered Nash's emotionless gaze at my birthday party 7 months ago. The way he'd stared at me like I was a problem to be solved. Now I finally understood what that look was calculating. He'd been planning this digital framework before the money even cleared. Maybe before Ilaria ever invited me to move in. "How long have you been able to prove this?" I asked. "Since we cloned the backup," Townsend said. 2 weeks ago, he printed a certified forensic report, signed it with a flourish, and stamped it with an official seal. The paper was still warm when he handed it to me. Sylvia drove me home in silence. I held the report on my lap and watched the familiar streets of Newport Beach pass by the window, thinking about how many layers of deception they'd built. The fake phone calls, the stolen truck, the manufactured stories about scammers and confusion, the sedatives disguised as vitamins. Every single piece of evidence they'd used against me was a lie. On Thursday evening, 3 days before Sunday, Ilaria cooked a massive, elaborate dinner. The scent was entirely different from her usual rotation, something with rosemary and garlic that filled the whole first floor. Nash came down wearing a crisp dress shirt and tie just to sit at home. I read these tiny details like blueprints now. Something was coming. We sat at the formal dining table, all 4 of us. Rue pushed peas around her plate. Nash cut his steak with deliberate precision. And Ilaria smiled that warm, loving smile I'd once believed was genuine. "Dad," she said, setting down her fork, "this Sunday we want to have a small family gathering. Just routine medical and asset protection documents we need you to sign. Purely a formality to make sure everything is in order." "Routine paperwork," I repeated. "Exactly." Nash leaned forward, his voice smooth as glass. "I've flown in a top specialist from Boston, leading authority on senior cognitive care. He's coming to meet you personally, just to make sure you're getting the best possible support." A Boston specialist. The fake doctor from their conservatorship folder. Dr. Harmon probably, or someone playing that role. Coming to evaluate me, declare me incompetent, witness my signature on documents that would transfer everything. Signature day, Sunday, 3 days away. "Sounds fine," I said, nodding slowly like a confused old man who didn't understand what was happening. "Whatever you think is best, sweetheart." Ilaria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I just want to take care of you, Dad. The way you always took care of me." Rue looked up from her corner of the table. She didn't understand the words, but her 8-year-old ears registered the strange, unnatural tension in her parents' voices, the forced cheerfulness, the performance happening right in front of her. She looked back down at her bread and didn't say anything. After dinner, I stood by the kitchen sink washing the dishes. The warm water ran over my hands, and I scrubbed each plate methodically, thinking about Sunday, about what would happen when the fake specialist arrived, about the moment Ilaria would realize I knew everything. Rue ran in from behind and wrapped her small arms tightly around my leg. She didn't say anything, just held on. An 8-year-old child who didn't have the words for what she was feeling, who couldn't articulate the wrongness she sensed in her parents' voices and her grandfather's careful answers. So she just held on for dear life. I looked down at her hair, the same dark brown Ida's had been, the same way it caught the light, and I knew that no matter how this Sunday went, this little girl had to be protected. Above everything else. 2 days before Sunday at 3 in the morning, I sat alone in the garage staring at a childhood photo of Ilaria and I broke. Friday, 2 days before signature day, at 3 in the morning, I sat alone in the pitch-black garage staring at a childhood photo of Ilaria sitting on my shoulders. For the first time since this began, I called Sylvia with a voice I didn't recognize as my own and said, "I can't do it." The garage was cold. I'd been sitting on a worn camping chair for an hour, maybe longer, with an old photo album open on the concrete floor. The weak dome light from my car illuminated just enough to see the pictures. Ilaria at 6 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the beach, her hands covering my eyes, while Ida laughed behind the camera. Ilaria at 12 accepting a trophy for a science fair project I'd helped her build. Ilaria at 16 wearing her first formal dress before the winter dance. That's my little girl, I kept thinking. I carried her out of the hospital when she was born. I taught her how to ride a bike. I sat up with her when she had nightmares. How can I possibly destroy her? The garage smelled like old motor oil and dust. The pre-dawn silence of Newport Beach pressed against my ears. The hidden iPad sat on the concrete beside me, screen dark. I opened the secure messaging app and typed Sylvia's name. She answered on the first connection alert despite the hour. "Stanley, Sylvia." My voice broke on her name. "I can't do it. I know what she did. I know what she's planning. But that's my little girl." Silence on the other end. Not the comfortable silence of someone thinking. The painful silence of someone choosing words carefully. Finally, Sylvia spoke, her voice soft but unyielding. "Stanley, what did Ida write in that letter?" I couldn't answer. The words stuck in my throat. "Trust your instincts. You are never wrong about people. Fight back." I hung up. For 2 more hours, I sat in the shadows of that garage holding the photo album, thinking about the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest, and the 35-year-old woman who was trying to have me declared incompetent so she could steal everything I'd built. Then I stood up, cut the light, and went back to bed. Because sometimes protecting a child means refusing to let them crawl any deeper into the darkness they chose. The next morning I continued the operation. What I didn't know until later was what Sylvia had been orchestrating during those weeks in March and April, while I sat at the breakfast counter, pretending I didn't know who the president was. She'd built a 3-pronged legal offensive that would have made a military strategist proud. Prong 1. A criminal attorney filed an official elder financial abuse complaint with the Orange County District Attorney's Office. The filing was backed by the complete forensic trail from DV Wellness LLC, every wire transfer, every false invoice, every dollar of the $800,000 that had been funneled to that Las Vegas address. Prong 2 Detective Raymond Norris from the Orange County Sheriff's Department reviewed everything. The wire recordings from the vitamin bottle, the digital forensics proving the fake phone calls, the lab analysis of the sedatives Ilaria had been giving me for months. He drafted arrest warrants for conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud, then sealed them waiting for the word to execute. Prong 3. The real estate attorney Marcus Whitaker, the same one who'd handled my land sale, formally verified that the transaction was completely clean. Every appraisal legitimate. Every disclosure proper. Zero legal exposure. The land deal Ilaria had been using as proof of my incompetence was actually proof of my brilliance. Sylvia told me all of this on Friday afternoon, sitting across from me in a law office conference room in Irvine. The room was sterile and cold, with a long table and windows overlooking a parking lot. "You did all that," I said slowly, while I was sitting at the counter pretending I couldn't remember what year it was. "You had the harder job," Sylvia replied. "While I was performing incompetence, she was building an ironclad legal fortress. While I was pocketing pills and acting confused, she was briefing detectives and filing complaints. While I was breaking down in the garage at 3 in the morning, she was making sure that when Sunday came, we would be ready. The arrest warrants are sealed," she continued. "The second Ilaria and Nash make their move on Sunday, the second they try to have you sign those conservatorship papers under duress, Detective Norris executes. They'll be in custody within the hour." I nodded, processing it all. The weight of what was about to happen. The end of this nightmare. The beginning of something worse. Then Sylvia paused. She looked down at the folder in front of her, then back up at me. "There's one more thing, Stanley," she said quietly. "The district attorney reviewed the files and wants to add a major charge to the indictment outside of elder abuse and fraud." I stared at her. "What charge?" Sylvia looked directly into my eyes, and I saw something there I hadn't seen before. Not pity, not sympathy. Something harder. Something final. "They are officially reopening the case file on Ida's death." The words hit me like a physical blow. For 3 years, I'd lived with the question. For 3 years, I'd wondered if my wife's sudden heart attack had been as natural as the doctors claimed. For 3 years, I'd seen that image in my mind. Ilaria in the kitchen that night, the small amber vial, Ida's nightly glass of orange juice. And now the district attorney wanted to know if my daughter had murdered my wife. Sunday wasn't just about conservatorship fraud anymore. "They want to exhume her body," Sylvia said softly. "They need your permission." I sat perfectly still in that sterile conference room, my hands flat on the table, and thought about Ida resting in the cemetery 3 miles from here. Thought about disturbing her peace. Thought about finally knowing the truth. When I asked, "Thursday morning, before Sunday. They want the preliminary toxicology results before the confrontation." I closed my eyes, opened them. "Do it," I said. That Thursday morning, Sylvia drove me to a building I never planned to step inside, the Orange County Coroner's Office. That Thursday morning, Sylvia drove me to a building I never in my life planned to step inside, the Orange County Coroner's Office, and I sat in the passenger seat, staring at the sign for a long time before I finally opened the door, because 3 years I had kept the question buried in silence, and today I was going to say it out loud. The office was sterile and freezing. Flat fluorescent lighting made everything look washed out and clinical. Ida's thick medical case file sat on a glass desk in front of me, and the room smelled like old paper and industrial air conditioning. Detective Raymond Norris stood beside a coroner official who explained the process in measured professional tones. Sylvia sat to my right, her presence solid and anchoring. "Mr. Foster," the detective said, "based on the letter and the documented pattern of abuse, the state has probable cause to investigate. The good news is that tissue samples from your wife's autopsy were preserved at Hoag Hospital. California law requires 20-year preservation. We don't need exhumation." The coroner official nodded. "Hair follicles in the tissue block can map cumulative chemical exposure over months. We just need your authorization to proceed with advanced toxicology testing." They slid a form across the desk. "Authorization to investigate the death of Ida Catherine Foster, my wife, my partner of 40 years, the woman who'd written me a letter from beyond the grave, telling me to trust my instincts." My pen hovered over the signature line for half a second. Then I signed. The detective picked up the form, examined my signature, then looked at me with something like respect in his eyes. Forensic testing will take 3 to 4 weeks. Mr. Foster, the courage it takes to sign that paper, that's the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years on this job. I didn't feel brave. I just felt like I was finally doing what Ida had asked in her letter, stop staying silent out of love. I walked out of that building into the glaring California sun. The warmth hit my face and something inside me cracked open. For the first time in 3 years, I stood under the California sky and wept openly, not hiding my face, not turning away from the people passing by on the sidewalk, just letting the tears fall. Detective Norris walked me to the car, one hand on my shoulder, giving me the dignity of silence. Sylvia drove me home without saying a word. Before I tell you what happened in that private dining room on Sunday, I need to know if you're still with me, comment. I should have exposed them publicly, or B, if you think I should have walked away and let the law handle it quietly. Add one reason so I can understand how you're seeing this story. A quick note, what comes next includes some recreated details for emotional impact and narrative flow. The lesson is what matters most. Sunday arrived like a storm I'd been watching gather on the horizon for months. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Pelican Room, a private dining space in Newport Beach, with leather couches arranged in a tight semicircle and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Ilaria wore a sharp navy blazer that made her look like she was chairing a board meeting. Nash wore a power red tie. Both of them dressed for victory. The extended family members filed in one by one. Helen, Alvin, Vernon, cousins I'd known my entire life. They took their positions, playing their rehearsed parts perfectly. Concerned relatives gathering to support a declining patriarch. Rue had been intentionally sequestered in an adjacent playroom with an iPad and headphones. Ilaria had made sure of that. I wore the navy suit Ida had chosen for me years earlier. I sat in the chair they'd positioned at the center of the semicircle, hands resting calmly on my knees. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the confrontation to begin. "Dad," Ilaria said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "Thank you so much for coming. This is just routine paperwork for your protection. Nothing to worry about." Nash leaned forward with that smooth, practiced smile. "We've arranged everything. Top specialist, medical evaluation. This will be quick and painless." The door opened. A man entered wearing a tailored suit and carrying an expensive briefcase. Mid-50s, polished Boston accent, the kind of confident bearing that came from years of fooling people. Dr. Kirk Pierce, though he'd introduce himself differently. Nash stood gesturing with a flourish. "Dad, this is Dr. Harmon from Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the country's leading experts in cognitive decline. He's flown in specifically to evaluate you and help us ensure you're getting the best possible care." The fake doctor extended his hand. I didn't take it. Instead, I smiled. Not a warm smile. The calm, predatory smile of someone who'd been 3 moves ahead for months. "Massachusetts General," I said slowly. "Fascinating. I called their credentialing office this morning. They haven't had anyone named Harmon on staff since 2019, the exact year your medical license was revoked in Florida for insurance fraud. Isn't that right, Mr. Pierce?" The room went absolutely silent. The fake doctor's face drained of color. Nash froze mid-gesture like someone had hit pause on a video. Ilaria turned to stone, her mouth slightly open, the manufactured sweetness evaporating from her expression. I sat perfectly relaxed, hands resting calmly on my knees, and smiled again. "Sit down, kids. This afternoon is going to be very long." The 3 of them stood there staring at me as if they were looking at a ghost. The fake doctor turned without a word and walked straight out the door, his expensive briefcase swinging at his side. Nash's face had gone from confident tan to pale gray. And for the first time in 14 months, I saw genuine fear enter Ilaria's eyes. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a second document. The fake doctor fled, but I wasn't finished. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the certified forensic report. The one proving the vitamins Ilaria gave me every morning contained lorazepam and alprazolam sedatives, and I placed it on the table between us. The room had plunged into a different kind of silence after the fake doctor ran. Harsh afternoon sunlight pierced through the horizontal blinds, cutting sharp lines across the leather furniture. Nobody moved. Ilaria tried desperately to regain control. Her voice came out too sweet, too careful. "Dad, even if that doctor had some credential issues, we're doing this because we love you. Have you been taking the vitamins we've been giving you?" "You're asking about the vitamins," I said calmly. "Fine." I stood up, walked slowly to the side table where a glass of water sat, then returned and placed the vitamin bottle dead center on the glass coffee table. The movement was deliberate, unhurried. I wanted everyone in that room to see it. Then I picked up the forensic report and read aloud. Lorazepam 2 milligrams, alprazolam 1 milligram, 2 high-dosage clinical sedatives compressed into custom tablets and placed inside a vitamin bottle. I looked up at Ilaria. "These aren't vitamins, Ilaria. These are prescription drugs used to sedate people before surgery." Ilaria's face went completely white. Nash didn't move a muscle. His eyes were locked on the report like it was a live grenade. "The lab tested 14 samples I collected over 2 weeks," I continued. "Every single pill contained the same chemical composition. Every morning you handed me sedatives, smiled sweetly, and watched to make sure I swallowed them. You were systematically drugging your own father to make him appear incompetent." That's when Sylvia stepped out from the hallway. She was holding the original vitamin bottle, the one from the kitchen counter at the estate. She tilted it upward, showing the base to everyone in the room. Taped to the bottom was a micro device no larger than a fingernail. A tiny red LED light pulsed steadily like a heartbeat. Sylvia's voice changed completely. Gone was the sweet Texas aunt. What came out was the authoritative steel voice of someone who'd spent decades handing down rulings from a bench. "This device," she said, "was installed under a legal law enforcement interception order issued by the state of California. Authorization number OC-2024-CF-1847. Every conversation in this house for the past 6 weeks has been recorded and is fully admissible in a court of law." Nash stared at the blinking red light. Then he looked up at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence stretched for 15 seconds, I counted, and 15 seconds is an eternity when nobody knows how to save themselves. Then Nash's gaze locked onto the blinking red light for 5 full seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something almost quiet, controlled even now. "I want my attorney." "Nash," Ilaria started. "I want my attorney," he repeated louder. Then, after a pause almost to himself, "The Las Vegas account, the Shell Corporation. She set it up. I just moved the money." He straightened his tie with a hand that trembled slightly. "That's all I'm saying without counsel present." It was enough. On a court-authorized recording in front of 11 witnesses, Nash Quinn had just confirmed the existence of DV Wellness, LLC, and placed Ilaria at its center. I stood up, calmly, walked to my leather briefcase that I'd brought that morning, and extracted a thick, bound financial ledger. I dropped it onto the coffee table with a heavy thud. No haste, no rage, just facts. "I know," I said quietly. "I've known since February. DV Wellness, LLC. $800,000 across 14 months funneled to a 29-year-old male at a Las Vegas address. And your debt structure with Silver State Capital, which happens to be a Nevada organized crime front. I know all of it, Nash." Nash stared at the ledger, then at me, his eyes wide. You knew since when?" "Since Sylvia found it," I said. "But I needed you to say it out loud. Your confession recorded legally on a court-authorized wiretap in this room is exactly what the district attorney needs to hear. And you just gave it to them." I looked at Nash and realized something profound. People who spend their lives controlling others are utterly useless the second they lose the steering wheel. Nash collapsed into the chair, his face in his hands. Ilaria stood frozen, staring at nothing. Helen and Vernon and the other relatives sat in stunned silence, watching two people destroy themselves in real time. Sylvia crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "For 3 months?" I said, my voice steady. I pretended to be confused. I pretended to forget things. I acted tired and docile and compliant. Every morning I took those pills from your hand. Ilaria smiled, said thank you. And the second you turned around, I slipped them into my pocket. Every single one. I walked back to my briefcase and pulled out a small plastic bag containing the pills I'd hoarded. I held it up so everyone could see. I gave these to a forensic laboratory. They analyzed the chemical composition. They documented the sedatives. They signed affidavits. And then we took all of that evidence, the pills, the recordings, the fake phone calls, the conservatorship documents you left in that locked room, and we handed it to the Orange County District Attorney's office. Nash stared at me as if he were looking at an alien life form. Ilaria stood completely frozen, her eyes locked onto a blank patch of wall. And I looked at my daughter, this 35-year-old woman, in her expensive navy suit, and I thought about the secret I had kept buried in my chest for 3 long years. The words I was about to say out loud for the very first time. I had carried my wife's secret for 3 years, not because I was a coward, but because even after everything, some part of me still hoped I had been wrong about my own daughter. "Do you remember," I said quietly, looking down at Ilaria, "how your mother drank a fresh glass of orange juice every single night before bed, every night for 40 years. It was her ritual." Ilaria's face went from white to gray. "On her very last night," I continued, my voice steady despite the tears starting to blur my vision. "I got up at 11:45 to get water. I saw the light under the kitchen door, and I watched through the crack as you opened a small amber vial over her glass, the glass sitting on the counter already poured and waiting for her. The room had gone so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. I watched you put the vial back in your purse," I said. "I watched you leave the kitchen, and 20 minutes later I watched your mother drink that glass of orange juice and tell me it tasted bitter. She asked if the oranges had gone bad. I told her they were fine. I told her to go to sleep." Ilaria dropped to her knees on the floor, mascara streaming down her face in black rivers. "Dad," she choked out. "At 3 in the morning she woke me up saying her chest hurt. By 3:15 the paramedics were in our bedroom. By 4:30 she was dead." My voice cracked on the word dead. "The doctors said it was a heart attack. Sudden cardiac arrest. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. I didn't tell anyone." Nash moved toward Ilaria, trying to pull her up, trying to get her out of the room before she said anything else. But she was frozen, locked in place, staring up at me. "I didn't mean for it to happen that way," she whispered. The words hung in the air like smoke. Meredith Cole. Ilaria's attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up fast. "My client isn't saying another word. This conversation is over." But it was too late. Sylvia had her phone out recording everything. 3 years ago, I got up for water at 11:45 at night. The house was dark and quiet. I saw light seeping out from under the kitchen door, thin and yellow against the hardwood floor. I pushed the door open just a crack and looked through. Ilaria stood at the counter. Ida's orange juice glass sat there, already poured condensation beading on the outside. Ilaria pulled a small amber vial from her purse, no bigger than my thumb. She unscrewed the cap, tilted it over the glass. I watched 3 drops fall into the orange juice. She screwed the cap back on, put the vial in her purse, and walked out. I stood in the hallway shadow and did nothing, and I said nothing. For 3 years I said nothing, because she was my daughter, because some sick, desperate part of me hoped I'd been mistaken. Hoped I'd seen something innocent that my grief-broken mind had twisted into something sinister. But I hadn't been mistaken. Why? I asked her now, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do that to your own mother? Ilaria opened her mouth, but before she could answer, the door opened. Detective Raymond Norris walked in, badge clipped to his belt, followed by a second plainclothes detective I didn't recognize. They moved with the calm, practiced efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Ilaria Foster Quinn, Detective Norris said, pulling out a folded document. Nash Quinn, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and suspicion of homicide in the death of Ida Catherine Foster. Ilaria didn't resist. She just knelt there on the floor, staring at nothing. Nash started to speak, started his lawyer routine about wrongful arrest and civil rights violations. But the second detective was already turning him around, pulling his wrists together. The handcuffs clicked shut on Ilaria's wrists. The metallic ratchet sound echoed in the quiet room, click, 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 each individual tooth catching and locking. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the afternoon sunlight, coming through the windows, throwing tiny rainbow prisms against the steel. The chain connecting the cuffs jingled softly as it settled against her skin. "Mommy!" The small voice came from the doorway. Rue stood there, in her pink shirt, her iPad hanging forgotten from one hand, her eyes huge and confused. She'd heard the commotion. She'd come to see what was happening, and she saw her mother in handcuffs. I crossed the room faster than I'd moved in years. I got between Rue and the scene, dropped to my knees in front of her, pulled her face into my chest. My hand covered her eyes. "Grandpa," she sobbed into my shirt. "Why are they taking Mommy? What's happening? Grandpa, please." "Shh," I whispered, holding her tight. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. I promise. It's going to be okay." But my own eyes were wet. Nash was handcuffed now too, still trying to argue, still trying to control a situation that had spun completely beyond his reach. The second detective read him his rights in a flat professional monotone. As they led Ilaria toward the door, she turned and looked back at me over her shoulder. Not with hatred, not with defiance, with the broken expression of someone who finally understood what she'd destroyed. Her own mother, her own father, her own daughter's innocence. Everything. Sylvia stood beside me, one hand on my shoulder. The detectives led them out. The door closed, and the only sound in that empty restaurant was Rue's muffled sobbing against my chest. Sylvia drove us home in silence. Rue fell asleep in the back seat, her tear-stained face pressed against the window. When we pulled into my driveway, I saw a black sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there when we left. Sitting behind the wheel was a woman I'd never seen before, mid-40s, dark hair, holding what looked like a telephoto camera. She was staring directly at my house. The media had found us. My phone rang before I could even turn off the ignition. Alvin's voice came through tight with urgency. "Get to the estate now. Everyone's waiting." The media could wait. Whatever that woman with the camera wanted, it could wait. I backed out of my driveway and drove the 3 miles to the Newport Beach estate, the house that had been my prison for months, now somehow feeling like something else entirely. 10 relatives stood in the living room when I walked in. Not sitting, standing. Arranged in a semicircle like they'd been waiting for this moment. Helen and Vernon and Marcus and Joyce and cousins I'd known my entire life. The faces that had watched me get humiliated at Thanksgiving. The faces that had looked away when Ilaria cut me down. Alvin stood at the center. "Stanley," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. "We need you to know something. We never abandoned you. Not for one single day." I stared at him, not understanding. "Every time Ilaria told us you were confused," Helen said, stepping forward. "Every time she explained away your behavior or said you were having a hard day, we didn't believe her. You all knew." The words came out barely above a whisper. "This whole time you knew she was lying. Your daughter tried to paint you as senile," Vernon said, his voice rough. We saw a man sharper than any of us, a man who'd built an empire from nothing and read legal documents like poetry. You don't forget how to be brilliant just because you turned 62. Marcus stepped forward. That arm squeeze in December, do you remember when Alvin drove you home from my house? I nodded slowly. That was the signal, Alvin said. That meant we're with you. Hold on. We see what's happening and we're working on it. But you all sat there, I said, and my voice was shaking now. At Thanksgiving, when she humiliated me in front of everyone, not one person defended me, because Ilaria was watching, Joyce said softly. If we'd pushed back too hard, she would have cut us off from you completely. We couldn't risk losing access. We needed to stay close enough to help when the time came. Sylvia coordinated everything, Alvin continued. She told us to play along. Act concerned but not suspicious. Keep Ilaria confident. And most importantly, document everything we witnessed. I had to grip the back of a chair because my knees were failing me. These people, my family, they had never left me at all. We recorded dates, Helen said. Times Ilaria told us you'd done something you clearly hadn't done. Conversations where she contradicted herself. Financial documents she showed us that didn't match what we knew about your business. We built a parallel case file, Marcus added. Everything we saw, everything that felt wrong, we gave it all to Sylvia. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because you needed to be genuinely confused, Alvin said. If you'd known we were on your side, you might have acted differently. Ilaria would have sensed it. The whole operation would have collapsed. Vernon stepped forward and put his hand on my shoulder. You carried the weight alone because that's what the plan required. But you were never alone, brother. Not for one damn second. I looked around at these faces, people who'd loved me and Ida for decades. People who'd watched us build our life together. People who'd sat at that Thanksgiving table and let me believe they'd abandoned me all while working in secret to save me. Thank you, I said, and the words felt inadequate for what I was feeling. Sylvia had been standing quietly by the window watching the reunion. Now she cleared her throat. Stanley, she said, I need to show you something. Can we talk privately? We walked to the study, Ida's favorite room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the mahogany desk where she used to pay bills and write letters. Sylvia closed the door behind us. Your wife knew, she said without preamble. She knew what was coming. I stared at her. Ida called me 48 hours before she died. Sylvia continued, her voice steady but soft. She said, Sylvia, if anything happens to me, it wasn't natural. Watch over Stanley. Watch over Rue. Don't let Ilaria destroy them. She knew Ilaria was going to kill her. She suspected, Sylvia said. She didn't have proof, but she'd noticed things. Money moving in ways that didn't make sense. Ilaria asking questions about estate planning that felt wrong. Your wife was brilliant, Stanley. She saw the pattern forming. Sylvia took a breath. I need to tell you something else. Something I haven't told anyone. She looked me directly in the eyes. I'm not just a retired attorney, she said. I spent 15 years as a Superior Court judge in Harris County, Texas. I retired from the bench 2 years ago. Ida knew that. That's why she called me. The room tilted slightly. You're a sitting judge, I asked. This whole time you've been an active Superior Court judge. When Ida called me, I had just finalized my retirement. I had the time, the legal knowledge, and nothing left to lose. Told my colleagues it was a family matter, which it was. Ida made me promise 2 things when she called: protect you and Rue, and make sure whoever hurt her faced justice. My wife, my Ida, had looked death in the eye and built a fortress around me from beyond the grave. She gave me something, Sylvia said quietly. She walked to the study desk and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. Ida's handwriting covered the front, my name written in the careful script I'd loved for 40 years. The ink was slightly faded. The date written in the corner read 3 years ago, 2 days before she died. Sylvia's hand trembled as she held it out to me. She asked me to give you this only after Ilaria was in custody, Sylvia said. Stanley, I think your wife predicted everything. That night, after Sylvia left and the family dispersed, I sat in Ida's study holding the sealed letter she'd written 3 years ago. But Rue needed me more than I needed answers, so I put the envelope in my desk drawer and climbed the stairs to her bedroom. The plastic stars on Rue's ceiling rotated slowly in the darkness, casting pale green constellations across her tear-stained face. She lay in her bed, eyes open, and staring at nothing, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. I sat in the chair beside her, the same chair where Ida used to sit, when Rue stayed over reading bedtime stories, in that gentle voice I'd never hear again. "Can I read you a story?" I asked softly. Rue shook her head. She didn't want a story. She wanted her mother. She wanted to understand why her world had shattered in the space of an afternoon. "Grandpa," she whispered, and her voice was so small it almost broke me. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why the police took Mommy?" "No, sweetheart." I moved from the chair to sit on the edge of her bed, taking her small hand in mine. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not a single thing." "Then why?" Her eyes filled with fresh tears. Why did they put those things on her wrists? Why was she crying? How do you explain to an 8-year-old child that her mother tried to destroy her grandfather, that she drugged him, lied about him, planned to steal everything he'd built, that she might have murdered her own mother? You don't. You protect her from that knowledge for as long as you possibly can. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, I said carefully. And when they do, there are consequences. Your mommy made some choices that hurt people. The police are making sure she takes responsibility for those choices. "Did she hurt you?" Rue asked, looking up at me with Ida's eyes. I couldn't lie to her. "Yes," I said quietly. "She did." Rue's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I'm so sorry." "Oh, sweetheart, no." I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight against my chest. "You have nothing to be sorry for. This is not your fault. Do you hear me? None of this is your fault. Will you leave me too?" She sobbed into my shirt. "Never," I said, and my own voice cracked. "I promise you never. You're stuck with me for as long as you want me around." She cried for a long time. I held her and watched those plastic stars rotate above us, their glow-in-the-dark light slowly fading as the minutes passed, and I thought that's what innocence looks like when it dies. 2 months later, I sat in Orange County Superior Court in Santa Ana and watched my daughter face formal charges. The courtroom was cold and sterile, all blonde wood and fluorescent lighting. Deputy District Attorney Michael Bradford stood at the prosecution table, a man in his late 40s with steel-gray hair and the kind of methodical presence that came from 2 decades of putting criminals behind bars. He read the indictments in a flat, professional tone that made the horror of the words somehow worse. The people of the state of California charge Ilaria Marie Foster Quinn with first-degree murder in the death of Ida Catherine Foster. Additionally, conspiracy to commit elder abuse administering controlled substances without consent, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Murder. The word hung in the courtroom air like smoke. Ilaria sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit that made her look small and young. Her attorney, a public defender who'd been assigned after her private counsel withdrew, shuffled papers with the exhausted air of someone who knew the case was already lost. Bradford continued. The people charge Nash Jonathan Quinn with conspiracy to commit elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Nash sat beside his own attorney, still trying to maintain that smooth confidence, even in county jail clothing. But his hands were trembling. The judge, not Sylvia, but a stern-faced woman who'd been on the bench for 30 years, looked down at the defendants over her reading glasses. Given the severity of these charges and the defendants' substantial financial means, the court finds both defendants represent significant flight risks. Bail is denied. Nash's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record and deep ties to the community. Your client is accused of attempting to defraud his own father-in-law of $50 million and conspiring to murder his mother-in-law, the judge said dryly. Bail is denied. next? Nash turned to his attorney, his voice carrying across the quiet courtroom. This is insane. We had a legitimate concern about his mental state. We were trying to help. Mr. Quinn, the judge said sharply, I suggest you stop talking. The bailiffs led them out through the side door that connected to the holding cells. Nash went first, still muttering to his attorney about appeals and wrongful prosecution. Ilaria walked behind him. As she passed the gallery where I sat, I caught my breath. This was the moment she would look at me. This was when our eyes would meet, and I would see what regret-hatred, some flicker of the daughter I'd raised. But she didn't look. She walked directly past me, her eyes fixed straight ahead, treating her own father as if he didn't exist, as if I were just another stranger in the courtroom, as if 40 years of my life raising her, loving her, protecting her meant absolutely nothing. The door closed behind her with a heavy metallic thud. I sat there for a long time after everyone else had left, staring at that closed door, feeling something inside me finally irrevocably break. As I walked out of the courtroom into the harsh afternoon sunlight, a bailiff stopped me in the hallway. Mr. Foster, this was just filed an hour ago. He handed me a subpoena with a case number I didn't recognize. I looked down at the plaintiff listed at the top and felt my stomach drop. Nash Quinn versus Stanley Foster. Petition for emergency custody of minor child. The custody petition turned out to be a desperate last move that died within 48 hours. No judge would remove Rue from my care when Nash was facing conspiracy to murder charges from behind bars. But that didn't stop him from trying. What stopped me cold was the forensic report that arrived 2 weeks later. The consultant slid the lab report across Sylvia's desk in her Irvine law office, and the words, digoxin 4 times therapeutic level, might as well have been written in my wife's blood. Dr. Elena Morrison sat across from me, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, and the kind of clinical precision that came from 2 decades of testifying in murder trials. She didn't soften the truth. Mr. Foster, she said, opening her folder, your wife's preserved tissue samples show digoxin levels 4 times higher than therapeutic dosing. She had no cardiac prescription, no medical indication for this drug. The presence is entirely unexplained by natural causes. Detective Norris stood by the window, arms crossed, listening. The hair follicle mapping. Dr. Morrison continued, pulling out a chart with colored bands. Shows gradual accumulation beginning in late 2023. We can trace the exposure timeline through the growth pattern. She was being poisoned for at least 5 months before her death. 5 months. The word hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't impulse, Dr. Morrison said flatly. This was systematic, methodical. Someone administered small doses over months, allowing the drug to accumulate in her system until her heart simply couldn't take it anymore. With this evidence, Detective Norris said from the window, we're amending the charge to first-degree murder with special circumstances. Premeditation is documented. Malice aforethought is clear. I sat perfectly still, staring at the colored bands on that chart. 5 months. Do you understand what that means? 150 nights I slept 20 feet from my dying wife while my daughter measured out poison. 150 mornings I kissed Ida goodbye, not knowing she was being slowly killed. Sylvia reached across the desk and took my hand. She knew, I said quietly. Ida called you 2 days before she died. She knew something was wrong. She felt it happening. She suspected, Sylvia said gently. But she had no proof, just intuition, just the feeling that something about Ilaria had changed. Dr. Morrison closed her folder. The trial will likely be scheduled for late summer. The prosecution has an airtight case. She was right. 14 months later, on a Tuesday in June, I sat in Orange County Superior Court and watched 12 jurors deliver their verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ilaria Marie Foster Quinn, guilty of murder in the first degree. The courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows. My family in the front. Sylvia beside me, her hand on my shoulder. Alvin on my other side, solid and steady. Ilaria sat at the defense table, In a gray suit, they'd brought her from county jail, her face blank and emotionless. She'd stopped crying weeks ago, stopped showing any reaction at all, just sat there like a mannequin through every day of testimony. The jury foreman continued reading. Guilty of conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Guilty of administering controlled substances without consent. Guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. Nash's verdict came next. 22 years for conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. Judge Harold Bennett, a stern-faced man who'd presided over Orange County Superior Court cases for 30 years, looked down at Ilaria from the bench. "Mrs. Quinn," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have been found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of your mother, Ida Catherine Foster. A woman who gave you life, who raised you, who loved you unconditionally." Ilaria stared straight ahead. "The court sentences you to life imprisonment, without possibility of parole, plus 10 years consecutive for the conspiracy and elder abuse convictions. Life without parole. She would die in prison. My daughter would spend the rest of her existence behind bars, and she would never hold her own daughter again." Ilaria turned to her attorney, the same exhausted public defender, and said in a flat, emotionless voice, "File the appeal paperwork," as if this were just a business setback, as if 30 years in prison were just another obstacle to overcome. The bailiffs came to escort her out. She stood, hands already cuffed behind her back, and walked toward the side door that led to the holding cells. She passed within 6 feet of where I sat. I waited for her to look at me, waited for some final acknowledgement, some flicker of the little girl who used to climb into my lap and fall asleep against my chest. Some recognition that I was her father and she was my daughter. And this was the last time we'd be in the same room as free human beings. But she never looked back, not once. She walked through that door without a glance in my direction, and the iron door slammed shut behind her. Final. Forever. Nash, being let out separately, turned and stared at me with pure venom in his eyes, as if this were my fault, as if I'd somehow forced him to conspire to steal my money and murder my wife. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, then disappeared through the same door. The courtroom slowly emptied. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. My family began to stand, gathering coats and bags. I sat there alone for a long time, staring at that closed door, thinking about the daughter I'd lost twice, once when she chose to become a murderer, and once when she refused to look at me as they took her away forever. That night, I finally opened the cream-colored envelope Sylvia had given me months ago. Ida's letter, written 2 days before she died. The first line stopped my heart. "My dearest Stanley, if you're reading this, then I was right about our daughter, and I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Ida's letter sat in my desk drawer for 3 weeks, before I could bring myself to read past that first devastating line. Her words were too raw, too knowing. She'd seen the darkness in our daughter months before I'd been willing to admit it existed. Some truths require time before you're strong enough to face them. But there were other truths that needed addressing first. The corporate executive shook my hand and said the words Ilaria had sworn I'd never hear. "Mr. Foster, that was the cleanest land transaction our legal team has ever audited." David Brennan sat across from me in the Irvine Real Estate Law Office, a senior executive from the Dutch development conglomerate that had purchased my coastal property. He was maybe 55, with the kind of confident bearing that came from closing billion-dollar deals. Marcus Whitaker, the real estate attorney who'd handled my original sale, sat beside me with a satisfied smile. "We knew you'd commissioned 3 separate appraisals," Brennan continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Independent valuations from 3 different firms. That's not fraud, Mr. Foster. That's exactly what a savvy investor should do." "The accusations," I started, "were baseless," Brennan cut in. "We did our own due diligence before purchasing. Extensive due diligence. Your daughter claimed you'd manipulated the market value, but the 2018 Orange County Regional Development Plan was public record. Anyone could have accessed it. You simply read it more carefully than most people did. He opened the folder and showed me the planning documents, maps, showing proposed infrastructure expansion zoning changes, transportation corridors, all public information, all filed years before I'd sold the property. Your timing was impeccable, Brennan said. You bought low when the land was industrial wasteland, held it through the planning phase, and sold just as the development plan was being implemented. That's not fraud. That's brilliant investment strategy. Marcus leaned forward. For the record, Mr. Foster's legal documentation on this sale was flawless. Every disclosure proper, every appraisal legitimate, zero irregularities. She tried to destroy me, I said quietly, for making a smart business decision. Brennan nodded. I read about the trial. I'm sorry for what you went through, but I wanted you to know, from a purely business perspective, you executed one of the most impressive land deals I've seen in 20 years. What do you call it when your daughter goes to prison for life? Because she couldn't accept that her father was simply better at business than she ever was. I shook Brennan's hand again and left the office with Marcus's documentation in my briefcase, official corporate confirmation that the deal Ilaria had weaponized as proof of my incompetence was actually proof of my expertise. 1 week later, I sat in an estate planning law office in Newport Beach with Sylvia and Catherine Webb, an estate planning attorney who specialized in charitable foundations. Catherine was in her 60s, with white hair and the kind of gentle competence that made you trust her immediately. She'd spent 40 years helping families turn tragedy into legacy. The structure we're proposing, she said, spreading documents across the conference table, divides your estate into 2 equal parts. $25 million into an education trust for Rue Quinn, accessible when she turns 25. The remaining $25 million establishes the Ida Foster Foundation. She pulled out the foundation charter. The mission is twofold: protecting women escaping coercive control and supporting families facing elder abuse. Legal aid, safe housing, financial counseling, therapeutic services. Irrevocable, I asked. Completely, Catherine confirmed. Once you sign these documents, no one can dissolve the foundation or redirect the funds. Not you, not your heirs, not any court order short of fraud, which won't apply here. This foundation will exist in perpetuity. Good, I said. I want Ida's name to mean something besides the woman our daughter murdered. Sylvia put her hand over mine. She would be so proud of this, Stanley, turning your pain into protection for others. Catherine showed me the governance structure. As we discussed, Sylvia will serve as primary trustee, given her judicial experience. We'll have a board of 7 directors from relevant professional fields: domestic violence advocacy, elder law, social work, financial planning. The foundation can start operating within 90 days of signing, she continued. We already have 3 cases ready for intake. A 68-year-old woman whose son is trying to force her into a nursing home to access her pension. A mother of 2 fleeing a husband who's been drugging her to maintain control. A 72-year-old man whose daughter forged his signature on property transfers. 3 people who needed exactly the kind of help I'd needed. 3 people who might not have family members willing to fight the way mine had fought for me. Where do I sign? I asked. Catherine walked me through each page. Trust documents, foundation charter, tax exemption paperwork, board appointment letters, Sylvia's trustee oath. When we reached the final signature page, Catherine pointed to a line. Your signature here. And we've left a space for a co-signature, symbolic only. Many people choose to include their spouse's name even posthumously if the foundation honors their memory. I looked at the blank line beside my name. Ida Catherine Foster. I signed my name first, then wrote hers beside it in careful letters. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt her hand guiding mine. It's done, Catherine said softly, countersigning as witness. The Ida Foster Foundation is now a permanent legal entity. Your wife's legacy will protect vulnerable families forever. Sylvia's eyes were wet. I sat there looking at our names together on that document, the last thing we would ever build together, and felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose. A reason to keep moving forward. That evening, as I was making dinner for Rue, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rue's therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child psychologist who'd been working with her twice a week since the arrests. "Mr. Foster," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice careful and measured. "I need to request an urgent family session. Rue has been asking questions about her mother, very specific questions about the night her grandmother Ida died. I think she remembers something she's been too afraid to tell you." 3 weeks after the verdict, I sat with Catherine Webb in her Newport Beach office and signed the final documents establishing the Ida Foster Foundation. The room smelled like fresh coffee and warm paper. Catherine laid the charter across the mahogany table, her pen already uncapped, ready for my signature. Sylvia sat to my right, serving as primary trustee, her 15 years on the bench now directed toward protecting the vulnerable instead of sentencing them. "First operational case is already in intake," Catherine said, sliding a single-page summary toward me. "A 68-year-old woman in Riverside. Her son and daughter-in-law have been isolating her from friends, controlling her finances, and telling her doctor she has dementia. She called our hotline yesterday." I stared at the summary. The details were different. Different city, different family, configuration, different dollar amounts. But the architecture of the abuse was identical. The isolation, the manufactured incompetence, the slow dismantling of a person's trust in their own mind. "How did she find us?" I asked. "Her neighbor saw the foundation announcement in the Orange County Register," Sylvia said. "Drove her to a payphone so the family couldn't intercept the call." A payphone. The same way people had escaped control before smartphones made surveillance easy. Some forms of cruelty were older than technology. 3 weeks after the verdict, I returned to Catherine Webb's Newport Beach office for one final formality, the operational paperwork that would allow the Ida Foster Foundation to begin accepting cases immediately. That evening, I called Dr. Mitchell to check on Rue's progress. "She's integrating remarkably well," Dr. Mitchell said. "Children are resilient when they have consistent, safe attachment. Rue knows she is loved. That's the foundation everything else is built on." "She asked me last week if good people can have bad parents," I said. "What did you tell her?" I told her yes. And I told her that having a bad parent doesn't make you bad. It just means you have to work a little harder to learn what love is supposed to look like. A pause. "That's exactly right, Mr. Foster. That's exactly what she needs to hear." After I hung up, I walked to the backyard. The October air carried the first real chill of autumn jasmine fading to something earthier and cool. The orange tree stood at the garden's edge, barely 3 feet tall, its leaves catching the last of the evening light. I stood there alone for a long time, thinking about all the things Ida had planted that were still growing. The foundation. Rue's quiet resilience. The letters left behind like breadcrumbs through a forest neither of us had known we'd have to navigate. I pulled out my wallet and unfolded the letter she'd hidden in the keepsake box, the one that began, "Stanley, my love, fight back." I read it one more time in the fading light. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in my wallet, and went inside to make dinner for my granddaughter. That tiny orange never grew. November frost took it in December. But Rue hadn't cried. She'd simply said, "Next year, Grandpa," and I'd heard Ida's patience in those words. 2 months had passed since the prison visit, and on this January Saturday morning, I poured 3 glasses of fresh orange juice without my hands shaking. The pitcher felt ordinary, no phantom weight of betrayal, no ghost of poison. Just cold glass, Florida oranges from the farmer's market pulp, floating golden in morning light. I set the glasses on the patio table where Sylvia and Rue waited in mild January sunshine. "Coffee's ready," Sylvia said, pouring from the French press. She'd extended her stay indefinitely, splitting time between helping with Rue and overseeing the Ida Foster Foundation's launch. Rue sat cross-legged, her art therapy notebook open, colored pencils scattered. 9 now asking fewer questions about her mother. Dr. Mitchell said that was progress, not forgetting, but integrating truth into a narrative she could carry. The foundation helped its first family this week, Sylvia said quietly. A mother and 3 children safe now because of Ida. Something cracked open in my chest, not pain but relief. Purpose reclaimed from ash. Tell me, woman in Riverside 61. Her son and daughter-in-law were doing exactly what Nash and Ilaria tried: gaslighting, financial isolation, fake diagnoses. She called our hotline 2 weeks ago. Sylvia sipped coffee. Yesterday the restraining orders came through. Ida would have loved that, I said. She did love it, Sylvia corrected. That's why she called me 48 hours before she died. She knew something was wrong. She planted seeds even then. Rue looked up from her drawing. Grandpa, when our tree grows big, can we make juice from it? We will, sweetheart, I said. We'll make it together. She smiled and returned to her drawing, small hand moving green pencil across the page. The January air smelled like jasmine and salt, that Newport Beach combination Ida had loved. The house felt lighter, as if exercising the conspiracy had lifted physical weight from the walls. You doing okay, Stan? Sylvia asked. Better than okay. I lifted my orange juice, studied light through it. This used to make me sick to look at. Now it's just juice again. Sylvia understood. She'd been there for the toxicology reports, the revelations, Rue's disclosure about Ilaria smiling in the doorway. She knew what it meant that I could pour orange juice without shaking. The orange tree stood at the garden's edge, barely 3 feet tall, its roots still finding purchase in new soil, exactly like us, Rue and me, learning to grow in ground, poisoned by grief. Rue abandoned her drawing and hopped down. I need to water the tree. You watered yesterday, baby. But it's Saturday. Saturday is tree day. She grabbed her plastic watering can and filled it from the garden hose. The roots need time to grow strong. I'd told her that once, quoting Ida, and she'd made it scripture. Every Saturday morning, Rue watered the orange tree with focused devotion most people reserve for prayer. Sylvia and I followed across the lawn. Rue positioned herself beside the tree, lifted her can, and began pouring, counting each dose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her tongue poked out in concentration, the same way Ida's used to when measuring ingredients. 5, 6, 7. She has your wife's hands, Sylvia said quietly. The way she cares for living things. I watched Rue adjust to her grip, make sure water fell on the root zone. Yet here they were, reincarnated in a 9-year-old's Saturday ritual. Ida used to say patience is what's left standing when everything else burns. She'd told me that during the 2008 recession, when her mother died, when the world kept taking pieces, and we had to decide whether to harden or endure, I'd spent 18 months running on rage and calculation, hunting evidence, protecting Rue through stubborn refusal to let evil win. But rage burns out. What remained now, watching my granddaughter water a tree with her grandmother's precision, was something quieter. Patience. The thing Ida had tried to teach me for 33 years. 8, 9, 10. Rue set down the can and crouched beside the tree, inspecting leaves with gentle fingers. Grandpa, look. 3 new leaves since last week. I knelt beside her, old knees creaking. 3 bright green leaves unfurling from the central stem. You're taking good care of it, Rue. Because it's Grandma Ida's tree, she said seriously. We have to make sure it grows strong so she can see it. My throat tightened. She can see it. I promise, sweetheart, she sees it. Rue smiled and ran her small hand over the trunk, checking for damage, feeling for strength. In that gesture, I saw not Ilaria's calculating touch or Nash's cold manipulation. I saw Ida's gentle competence, her understanding that some things can't be rushed. The family line hadn't been corrupted. It had been redeemed. Ida. I thought if you can see this, your granddaughter watering an orange tree in January sunshine. I hope you know we made it through. I hope you know Sylvia is here helping me raise her right. I hope you know the foundation is saving families and your love is still doing its work. Rue stood brushed dirt from her knees. All done. Next Saturday we'll check again. Next Saturday, I agreed. We walked back to the patio, the three of us, a family rebuilt from rubble. The foundation was saving strangers. The tree was growing. Rue was healing. The ghosts were quiet. That afternoon, Rue brought me a drawing she'd made in art therapy, our family tree with branches spreading across the page. At the top, she'd written Grandma Ida in careful purple letters. Below that, names connected by lines, Aunt Sylvia Alvin, the cousins who'd stood with me. At the bottom, she'd drawn two stick figures holding hands beneath an orange tree. The label read in her determined second-grade handwriting, "What's still standing?" I stared at those three words. Not what survived survival was passive. What's still standing? Active, deliberate, rooted. "Is it good, Grandpa?" Rue asked. I pulled her into my lap, her small weight solid and warm. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Exactly perfect." She nestled against my chest. This child who'd witnessed her grandmother's murder at 4 and her mother's arrest at 8, who'd lost so much and somehow still believed in orange trees and family. Outside, January sun slanted golden across the backyard. The orange tree stood patient and small roots drinking deep leaves, reaching for light. Tomorrow would bring therapy appointments, foundation meetings, the work of turning grief into purpose. But today, on this mild January Saturday, we were what's still standing. And that was enough. That evening, after Rue had gone to bed, I was putting her drawing into Ida's old keepsake box when I noticed the velvet lining had come loose in one corner. The box sat on my dresser, where it had lived for 3 years, rosewood, with brass hinges filled with Ida's keepsakes. I'd been adding Rue's artwork to it, small reminders of healing. The corner of the lining had pulled away. I ran my finger along the edge, felt something underneath. Paper. I peeled back the false lining, carefully revealing a small folded note. The handwriting was Ida's, that precise Catholic school script. The note was dated August 15th, 2022, 1 week before she died. "I knew you would figure it out." "You always do." 9 words. They hit like a freight train. "Stanley." Sylvia appeared in the doorway. I handed her the note wordlessly. She read it, eyes filling. "She knew you, Stanley. All the way down to your bones, she knew you. She left me breadcrumbs all the way through," I said, voice rough. "Even from the grave. The letter hidden in the bedroom. The call to you 48 hours before her death. This." I held up the note. "She trusted me to figure it out." "She also knew you'd need reminders," Sylvia said gently. "That grief might make you doubt yourself, so she left proof of her faith." I sat on the bed staring at those 9 words. Ida had written this knowing she might die, knowing Ilaria was dangerous, and still she'd believed absolutely that I would protect what mattered. "I almost didn't," I whispered. "There were nights I wanted to sign the papers, take Rue and disappear. But you didn't, because she knew I wouldn't." I folded the note carefully, placed it back. "Because of this." Sylvia sat beside me. "Ida always said you built things to last houses and families. I spent 18 months in controlled rage. Rage with a plan is just another kind of patience," Sylvia said. "You gave Ilaria every chance to stop." That was true. Even after I'd found the documents, heard the wiretap recordings, some part of me kept waiting for Ilaria to wake up, to choose her daughter over greed, to choose love. She never had. Maybe you think I should have seen it coming sooner, should have stopped her before she poisoned my wife. But when it's your daughter, you keep hoping you're wrong. You keep giving chances. You keep believing that somewhere under the manipulation is the child. You raised the girl who brought you dandelions. I'd been compliant those early months, partly because I was documenting evidence, but also, and this still keeps me up some nights, hoping hoping she'd stop on her own, hoping maternal instinct would kick in, hoping some fragment of the daughter I'd loved was still alive. It wasn't, but Ida had seen it. She'd known something was wrong in Ilaria, and she'd trusted me to handle it when the time came, not with rage, with patience, with the same methodical competence I'd used to build houses for 40 years. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet patience. Sometimes it's collecting evidence and letting your daughter think she's winning while you document every move. The true measure of survival isn't what you lost. It's whether you choose to water the soil every morning anyway. You know what Rue asked tonight? Sylvia said. She asked if good things can grow where bad things happened. I told her yes. I told her that's exactly what you two were doing. I thought about the orange tree. Barely established roots still finding strength. We'd planted it in the same yard where Ilaria had orchestrated murder, where Nash had gaslit me, where a 4-year-old witnessed evil and carried it alone for years. Now Rue watered it every Saturday with her grandmother's precision. Now it was growing new leaves. Now it was becoming something beautiful in poisoned ground. An orange tree doesn't grow. In a day it takes sun and water and patience, and the stubborn belief that something good can come from poisoned ground. I'm going to check on Rue, I said. Her room smelled like lavender. The nightlight cast stars across the ceiling, her stuffed rabbit tucked beside her. She was asleep, one small hand curled against her cheek. I watched her breathe this child, who'd survived so much and still believed. I figured it out, Ida, I whispered, just like you knew I would. The next morning, I made fresh orange juice. Rue helped her small hands working the press with fierce concentration. We poured 3 glasses, one for her, one for me, and one we set beside Ida's photograph on the counter. For Grandma Ida, Rue said solemnly. For Grandma Ida, I agreed. We carried our glasses outside. The January sun was already warm. The orange tree stood at the garden's edge, leaves bright green. Rue took a sip, made a face. Too sour. You'll like it better when you're older. When our tree makes oranges, will they be sweet? I hope so, sweetheart. She grabbed her watering can. Can I water it even though it's Sunday? Yeah, you can water it anyway. I watched her tend the tree with gentle precision, counting pores, checking leaves, whispering encouragement. This was what Ida had trusted me to protect. Not money or legacy, this. A 7-year-old who still believed good things could grow. The orange tree was still small. It would be years before it bore fruit, if it ever did. But it was growing. Roots drinking deep leaves, reaching for light. That was enough. Some stories end with justice, some with revenge. This one ends with something quieter. A grandfather and his granddaughter standing in the same yard, where everything nearly fell apart, choosing to grow something new in the soil where the poison had been. And to you listening to my story, remember this family betrayal cuts deep, but patience can outlast even the cruelest deception. If I could go back, would I have confronted Ilaria sooner? Maybe. But sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is knowing when to stop hoping they'll change. I gave my daughter 18 months of chances even after I knew what she'd done. Don't confuse patience with enabling. Know the difference between giving someone time and giving them more opportunities to harm you. The lesson I learned is this: evil doesn't always announce itself with fury. Sometimes it wears the face of your own child. But justice requires more than rage. It requires documentation, strategy, and wisdom to know when to act. I believe God put me through this trial to show me that patience paired with purpose can protect others. The Ida Foster Foundation is saving families now because I didn't let grief paralyze me. I let it sharpen me. These family stories, revenge situations, are more common than you think. If you're facing your own family stories, revenge crisis, financial abuse, gaslighting, manipulation, document everything. Remember, family stories, revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting free and protecting the innocent. What did you think of this story? Drop a comment below. I read every one. If this resonated with you or you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it. And if you want more stories about family justice and survival, subscribe to Dad Family Revenge. Your support helps these messages reach people who need them. Thank you for staying until the end. Final note: certain details have been fictionalized for privacy. What matters most is the message.